Tired of counting tips and serving overpriced meals to Miami's elite, single mother Marisol Reyes finally snaps at the wrong customer, NBA legend Shaquille O'Neal. She tells him and his loudly laughing friends what she really thinks about overpaid athletes who've never worked real jobs. Like, what she doesn't know is that Shaq owns the restaurant. Her outburst is being watched by the city's most feared food critic. And her mistake is about to change not just her life, but the lives of countless families in need. Sometimes, standing up for what you believe can lead to places you never imagined, even if it means losing everything first. Marisol Reyes stared at her reflection in the Pearl's gleaming kitchen doors, adjusting her crisp white apron for the 10th time. The restaurant's chandelier lights caught the worry lines around her eyes, carved deeper by years of staying up late, counting pennies at her kitchen table. Her dark hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, not a strand out of place, exactly as Vernon Wright, the restaurant manager, had insisted during her hiring. Remember, Vernon's voice cut through the elegant chaos of Miami's most exclusive restaurant. Table 12 is our most important reservation of the night. I don't care if you're new, Marisol. Perfection isn't optional at the Pearl. Marisol nodded, swallowing hard. Her feet already ached from the morning shift at Joe's Diner, where she'd been serving truckers and early bird retirees since 5 a.m. But beggars couldn't be choosers, and single moms with sick kids definitely couldn't. "Yes, Mr. Wright," she answered, her slight accent drawing a frown from Vernon. She'd worked hard to soften it since arriving from Peru 6 years ago, but tonight's nerves were bringing it back. As Vernon walked away, Marisol pulled the wrinkled photo from her apron pocket, her lucky charm. 8-year-old Diego smiled up at her, gap-toothed and beautiful, his dark eyes bright despite the hospital bed he sat in. The image was from a good day when the heart monitors had shown strong rhythms and the doctors had talked about progress. "This is for you, mijo," she whispered, tucking the photo away as the kitchen doors swung open. The Pearl was everything Joe's Diner wasn't. Crystal stemware caught the light like diamonds, white tablecloths draped to the floor without a single wrinkle. The soft murmur of conversation mixed with the gentle clinking of fine china and the subtle notes of jazz from the live band in the corner. A month's worth of tips from Joe's wouldn't cover a single dinner here. Marisol moved between tables with practiced grace, delivering plates of artfully arranged cuisine that looked more like paintings than food. Her section was running smoothly until a commotion near the entrance caught her attention. The maitre d' was apologizing profusely to a group of suited businessmen. "I'm so sorry, gentlemen. We're fully booked, except for the last table of the night, Table 12. It won't be available until 10 p.m. Marisol's heart skipped. Table 12, her table. The one Vernon had been so insistent about. She glanced at her watch, 7:30 p.m. The mysterious VIP reservation wasn't for another 2.5 hours. The evening, blurred by in a parade of sophisticated dishes and demanding customers. A woman sent back her salmon 3 times. A man lectured Marisol for 10 minutes about the proper temperature for red wine. Her smile never wavered, but her lower back screamed with each step. At 9:45, she caught herself yawning while rolling silverware. The double shift was catching up with her. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Rodriguez, her elderly neighbor who watched Diego. "He's sleeping now. Fever's down. Took his medicine at 8. Marisol closed her eyes, offering a silent prayer of thanks. "One less worry for tonight." "Marisol!" Vernon's sharp whisper made her jump. "Table 12's guests are early. They're being seated now." She quickly gathered her order pad and pen, squaring her shoulders. Just one more table. One more hour of perfect service, perfect smile, perfect everything. Then she could go home to Diego, count her tips, and maybe have enough extra to buy him that art set he'd been eyeing at the dollar store. The voices from table 12 carried across the restaurant. Deep, masculine laughter that seemed to bounce off the crystal chandeliers. As Marisol approached, she could see 5 men in expensive suits that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The largest of them sat with his back to her, his broad shoulders stretching the fine fabric of his jacket. She plastered on her best, welcome smile, ignoring the heaviness in her legs and the way her lower back pinched with each step. This was the Pearl, and at the Pearl, everything had to be perfect. "Good evening, gentlemen," she began, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Welcome to the Pearl. My name is Marisol, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." The largest man turned around, and Marisol caught a glimpse of a familiar face. Someone she should recognize, perhaps from TV or magazines. But her tired mind couldn't place him, and right now it didn't matter. He was just another customer at just another table, even if it was the last table of the night. She had no way of knowing that this table, this man, and the next few minutes would change everything. Little Diego's art set would have to wait. 3. Booming laughter from table 12 rattled the water glasses again, making Mrs. Henderson at table 9 purse her lips in disapproval. Marisol fought the urge to apologize. These men, especially the largest one with the gleaming diamond ring and infectious smile, seemed to fill the entire restaurant with their presence. "And what would you recommend tonight?" the big man asked, his voice warm and friendly despite its volume. He looked at her name tag. "Marisol, that's a beautiful name." For a moment, she was transported back to her grandmother's kitchen in Lima, where the smell of garlic and cilantro had danced in the air as she learned to cook. "Our chef's special tonight is the herb-crusted sea bass," she said, pushing the memory away. "It comes with—" "Nah, that's too fancy," one of the other men cut in. "What's good here, Shaq? You should know, right?" Marisol's pen hovered over her notepad. Shaq? The name tugged at something in her memory, but exhaustion had turned her brain to soup. All she could focus on was the growing ache in her feet and the fact that Mrs. Henderson was signaling for her bill while these men hadn't even ordered. "Everything's good here," the big man, Shaq, said with a wink. "But tonight I'm thinking we all need the porterhouse. Medium rare. And keep those. Appetizers coming." The other men nodded in agreement, and Marisol scribbled down the order. As she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of someone at a corner table. A man in an expensive suit sitting alone, writing in a small notebook. Something about his careful observation of everything around him made her nervous. In the kitchen, Chef Marcus took one look at the order and raised his eyebrows. "Table 12 going big tonight. You know who that is out there, right?" Marisol shook her head as she gathered bread baskets. "Someone important, obviously." Chef Marcus laughed. "Girl, that's Shaquille O'Neal. You know, the basketball legend?" The name should have meant something to her, but all Marisol could think about was Diego's last doctor's appointment. The specialist had mentioned a new treatment, something promising, but the numbers he'd written down had made her stomach drop. Even with insurance, it would take years to pay off. A crash from the dining room snapped her back to reality. One of Shaq's friends had knocked over a wine glass, and the red liquid was seeping into the pristine white tablecloth. The man was laughing it off, but Vernon's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "I'll take care of it," Marisol said quickly, hurrying to clean up the mess. As she dabbed at the tablecloth, more boisterous laughter erupted from the table. The sound grated against her nerves like sandpaper. "You'd think they were at a sports bar," Mrs. Henderson muttered loudly as she passed by. Marisol's hands trembled slightly as she finished cleaning. These men probably spent more on dinner than she made in a month. They had no idea what it was. Like to count coins for bus fare or to tell your child they had to wait for new shoes because this month's medical bills came first. When she returned with their appetizers, Shaq smiled at her again. "Hey, you look like you could use a break. Everything okay?" The genuine concern in his voice almost broke through her exhaustion-fueled irritation. Almost. But then, one of his friends made another loud joke, and she saw the solitary man in the corner frowning as he wrote in his notebook. "I'm fine, sir," she replied, her grandmother's voice in her head reminding her that pride and good service were all parts of the same meal. "Will there be anything else?" More laughter, more inside jokes about someone named Kobe, more looks from other diners. As Marisol headed back to the kitchen, she remembered another table from long ago, the one in Peru where she'd studied her culinary textbooks late into the night, dreaming of owning her own restaurant someday. That was before Diego, before his father disappeared, before life had taught her that some dreams cost too much. The porterhouse steaks were almost ready, and the night was almost over. Just a little longer, she told herself. Just a few more trips, between kitchen and table, a few more forced smiles, a few more moments of watching the wealthy enjoy their evening while she counted the minutes until she could check on her son. But something inside her was stretched too thin, like an old rubber band about to snap. And she didn't know it yet, but the breaking point was coming, as sure as the tide that rolled against Miami's shores, outside the Pearl's expensive windows. What she also didn't know was that the man in the corner was Stephen Chen, the city's most feared restaurant critic, and he was watching everything unfold with growing interest. The kitchen doors swung open with a bang that made Marisol jump. Chef Marcus was staring at his phone, his face pale. "There's a problem," he said. "The meat delivery guy's truck broke down. The porterhouse steaks for table 12 are stuck 20 minutes away." Marisol's stomach clenched. She glanced through the kitchen window at Shaq's table, where the men were finishing their appetizers. Stephen Chen was still writing in his notebook, his eyes moving between his phone and table 12. "How long?" she asked. 30 minutes, minimum," Chef Marcus replied, already pulling out his phone to call someone else. Marisol pushed through the doors, her heart pounding. As she approached table 12, Shaq was in the middle of telling a story that had his friends wiping tears of laughter from their eyes. "Gentlemen," she began, but one of the men talked right over her. "Remember when you broke that backboard in Phoenix?" he asked Shaq. "Man, those were the days." "Excuse me," Marisol tried again, louder this time. "I need to inform you about a slight delay with your entrees." The laughter died down. Shaq turned to her with a gentle smile. "No problem. These things happen. Right, guys?" But one of his friends, the one who'd spilled the wine earlier, wasn't so understanding. "Delay? Come on, we've been here forever. Already. I thought this was supposed to be the best restaurant in Miami." "We're doing our best to," Marisol started, but the man cut her off again. "Maybe if the staff spent less time hovering and more time actually working," he said with a smirk. The others chuckled, except for Shaq, who frowned slightly. Something snapped inside Marisol. Maybe it was the double shift. Maybe it was the memory of Diego's tired face this morning as she left for work. Maybe it was the way these men treated the Pearl like their personal playground while she scraped and saved for her son's medicine. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry our timing doesn't suit your schedule. I'm sorry we can't all spend our evenings laughing about broken backboards and $1,000 bottles of wine. Some of us are too busy working real jobs." The silence that fell over the restaurant was absolute. Even the jazz band stopped playing. From his corner table, Stephen Chen's pen moved furiously across his notebook. "Real jobs?" the wine spiller sputtered. "Do you know who you're talking to?" Maria, Shaq said quietly, getting her name wrong. It's okay. We didn't mean... It's Marisol, she corrected him, years of frustration pouring out. And no, I don't know who you are. I don't follow sports. I'm too busy working 2 jobs and trying to make ends meet. So maybe you could show a little respect for the people serving you, instead of acting like you own the place. Vernon materialized beside her like a ghost. Marisol, my office, now. She looked around the silent restaurant. Other diners stared. The jazz band awkwardly shuffled their sheet music. Stephen Chen was already reaching for his coat, but it was Shaq's expression that made her stomach drop. He wasn't angry. Instead, there was something in his eyes that looked almost like understanding, but mixed with something else she couldn't read. Mr. O'Neill, Vernon was saying, I cannot apologize enough for this inexcusable. It's fine, Shaq interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. Really? But Marisol knew it wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. As Vernon led her away, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in a mirror. Her perfect bun had come loose, dark strands falling around her face. 6 years of hard work, of swallowing her pride, of doing whatever it took to give Diego a better life. All undone in a moment of anger. In Vernon's office, she didn't wait for him to speak. She untied her apron with trembling fingers. I know, she said. I'm fired. Vernon's face was a mix of anger and disbelief. Do you have any idea what you've done? That man isn't just some celebrity basketball player. But Marisol didn't hear the rest. She was already walking away, her mind racing. How would she pay for Diego's next treatment? Would Joe's diner give her more hours? Could she sell her mother's old jewelry? As she gathered her things from her locker, she heard voices in the hallway. Never seen anything like it, someone was saying. But maybe this is exactly what we needed. The owner won't be happy, Vernon replied. Marisol froze. The owner? In 6 years, she'd never heard anyone mention who actually owned the pearl. But she couldn't think about that now. She had to get home to Diego, had to figure out their next move, had to be strong for her son, like always. As she slipped out the back door into the Miami night, she didn't notice the black SUV with tinted windows idling in the parking lot. She didn't see the large figure watching her leave, and she certainly didn't know that her worst professional moment was about to become the best thing that ever happened. The Miami night was thick with humidity as Marisol waited for her bus. Her phone buzzed. Another text from Mrs. Rodriguez. Diego, woke up asking for you. Fever's back. Should I give him more medicine? Marisol's hands shook as she typed her reply. The memory of her last outburst at the Pearl still burning in her mind. She could still see Shaq's face, still hear Vernon's voice, still feel the weight of all those stares. The bus was late, giving her too much time to remember another night, 6 months ago, in the emergency room. Mama, it hurts, Diego had whispered, his small hand clutching his chest. The heart monitor beeped steadily beside him, its green line dancing up and down like a terrible metronome. I know, mijo, she'd said, stroking his hair. The doctors are coming. Dr. Patterson had arrived with his kind eyes and serious clipboard. We can try a new treatment, he'd explained. But your insurance, there will be significant out-of-pocket costs. How much? Marisol had asked. When he'd told her, she'd nearly collapsed. It might as well have been $1 million. There are payment plans, he'd offered gently, and some charitable foundations. But the foundations had waiting lists. The payment plans required good credit. And now, sitting at this bus stop with tears threatening to spill, Marisol had just lost her best chance at extra income. The bus finally arrived, its brakes squealing in the night. As she climbed aboard, her uniform still smelling of the pearls. Expensive cuisine. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Don't answer it, she told herself. Just get home to Diego. But something made her look at the message. Ms. Reyes, this is Stephen Chen from the Miami Herald. Her heart stopped. The restaurant critic. He must have gotten her number from someone at the Pearl. I witnessed your interaction this evening. I'd like to speak with you for my upcoming review. Marisol quickly turned off her phone. A bad review would hurt the Pearl, hurt her former co-workers who had families of their own to support. Even angry and hurt, she couldn't do that to them. The bus wound through Miami's glittering streets, past restaurants and clubs where people spent more on a single night than she made in a month. She pressed her forehead against the cool window, remembering the way she'd snapped at Shaq and his friends. Some of us are too busy working real jobs. The words echoed in her head, making her cringe. Her grandmother would have been so disappointed. Your pride can feed your soul, she used to say, but it can't feed your family. The bus turned onto her street, in the quieter, dimmer part of the city. As she walked the 3 blocks to her apartment, she could see Mrs. Rodriguez's light still on. The elderly woman was probably worried sick about both Diego and Marisol. She climbed the 4 flights of stairs slowly, her feet aching from the long day. Outside her apartment, she took a deep breath, put on her brave face, and opened the door. "Mama!" Diego called from the couch, his voice raspy. Mrs. Rodriguez sat beside him, looking relieved to see Marisol. "Mi amor." Marisol rushed to feel his forehead. Still too warm. "Did you take your medicine?" "Yes, but..." Diego's eyes filled with tears. "I heard Mrs. Rodriguez talking on the phone. You lost your job?" Marisol shot a look at her neighbor, who had the grace to look embarrassed. "I was calling my son," Mrs. Rodriguez explained. "He might know of some work." "It's okay," Marisol forced a smile. "Sometimes things happen for a reason, right? And I still have the diner." Diego struggled to sit up, his Superman pajamas hanging loose on his thin frame. "Was it because of me? Because you were tired from taking care of me?" "No." Marisol gathered him in her arms, her heart breaking. "Never think that, mijo. Nothing that happens is your fault. You're the best thing in my life." After Mrs. Rodriguez left, and Diego finally fell asleep, Marisol sat at their small kitchen table, spreading out bills and her tip money from the diner. The numbers refused to add up, no matter how many times she moved them around. From the living room came the sound of Diego coughing in his sleep. The same cough that had first sent them to the doctor 2 years ago, leading to the discovery of his heart condition. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance, and Marisol buried her face in her hands. She couldn't break down. She had to be strong, had to find a way. That's when she heard it. Voices in the hallway outside her apartment. One of them sounded strangely familiar. "Are you sure this is the right place?" a deep voice asked. "Yes, sir," another voice replied. "4th floor, apartment 4C." Marisol froze. That first voice. It couldn't be. Someone knocked on her door. Marisol stared at her door, her heart pounding. The knock came again, softer this time. "Ms. Reyes?" That deep voice. "I apologize for the late hour." She glanced at Diego, still sleeping on the couch. Moving quietly, she approached the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty except for a white envelope propped against her welcome mat. Confused, she opened the door just enough to retrieve the envelope. It was thick, expensive paper, with "The Pearl Restaurant" embossed in silver at the top. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter, handwritten in bold strokes. Dear Ms. Reyes, your presence is requested at the Pearl tomorrow at 10 a.m. This is not about your termination. Please come. There's something important we need to discuss. Sincerely, Management. Marisol sank into her kitchen chair, the letter floating to the table like a fallen leaf. Why would they want to see her? To make her sign something? To threaten? Legal action? Mama? Diego's sleepy voice made her jump. He stood in the kitchen doorway, blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Who was at the door? Just a delivery, mijo. She quickly tucked the letter away. You should be sleeping. Diego shuffled to the table, dragging his blanket like a cape. In the dim kitchen light, his face looked too pale, too serious for an 8-year-old. Are you going to cry? No, baby. Why would you think that? Because you have your brave face on. He climbed into her lap, something he hadn't done in months. That's the face you make at the hospital when you're trying not to cry. Marisol hugged him close, breathing in the baby shampoo smell of his hair. When had her little boy become so perceptive? I got in trouble at work today, she admitted. I lost my temper and said things I shouldn't have. Diego was quiet for a moment. Then, like when I yelled at Tommy Martinez for making fun of my medicine, sort of like that, yes. And you made me go apologize to him the next day. Diego looked up at her with those wise eyes. Because you said we have to face our mistakes. Marisol felt tears prick her eyes. Out of the mouths of babes, her grandmother would have said, They want me to go back tomorrow, she said softly. But I'm scared. Superman gets scared too, Diego told her seriously. But he goes anyway. A laugh bubbled up through her tears. When did you get so smart? Must be all the medicine, he grinned, then yawned hugely. Will you tell me a story? The one about the chef in Peru? She carried him back to the couch, tucking the blanket around him. As she told him about her grandmother's famous ceviche and the secret ingredient she'd never reveal, Diego's eyes grew heavy. Mama, he murmured, half asleep. I think tomorrow will be good. Like in the movies when something bad happens, but then it turns into something magical. Maybe, mijo. She kissed his forehead, relieved to feel it cooler. Maybe. After he fell, asleep, Marisol read the letter again. The handwriting was distinctive. Large, confident loops and sharp angles. Something about it seemed familiar, but she couldn't place it. She thought about Shaq's face when she'd lost her temper. Not angry, but something else. And those voices in the hallway. Had that really been him? Why would someone like Shaquille O'Neal come to her apartment building? Her phone buzzed again. Stephen Chen. Ms. Reyes, please reconsider speaking with me. Your story needs to be told. She deleted the message. Whatever happened tomorrow, she wouldn't make things worse by talking to a critic. Setting her alarm for early, Marisol tried to sleep in the armchair next to Diego, but her mind kept spinning with questions. Who had written the letter? What did they want? And why did she have a feeling that tomorrow would change everything? In his sleep, Diego smiled, as if sharing a secret with his dreams. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was like one of his movies, where the darkest moment comes just before the magic. Or maybe, she thought as she finally drifted off, some mistakes can't be fixed, no matter how brave you are in facing them. The letter sat on the kitchen table, its silver lettering catching the streetlight from outside. In a few hours, Marisol would discover just how wrong that last thought was. the pearl looked different in the morning light. Without the evening glamour, Marisol could see the small imperfections, a scuff on the brass door handle, a crack in one marble tile, a smudge on the window that caught the sun. Somehow, these tiny flaws made her feel better. She dropped Diego at Mrs. Rodriguez's after giving him his morning medicine. "Be brave," he'd whispered, hugging her tight. Now, standing outside the restaurant's entrance at 9:55 a.m., she held onto that hug like a shield. Vernon opened the door before she could knock. His usual pristine appearance was slightly rumpled, as if he hadn't slept well. "Ms. Reyes," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Follow me, please." Instead of going to his office, he led her through the empty dining room toward the private dining area, a section of the Pearl she'd never been allowed to enter. Her heels clicked against the floor, each step echoing in the morning quiet. Vernon stopped at a heavy wooden door. "Wait here," he said, then disappeared inside. Marisol smoothed her best dress, the one she'd worn to Diego's school conferences. She could hear muffled voices from behind the door, then footsteps approaching. The door opened, and there was Shaquille O'Neal, filling the doorframe like a mountain in an expensive suit. "Ms. Reyes," he smiled, "please come in." She followed him into a room that looked more like a cozy library than a dining space. Rich wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with books and basketball memorabilia. A small table was set with coffee and pastries. "Have a seat," Shaq gestured to a comfortable leather chair. "Vernon, that'll be all." The manager hesitated for a moment, then left, closing the door behind him. "I imagine you're wondering why you're here," Shaq said, settling into a chair that somehow didn't seem dwarfed by his presence. "Mr. O'Neal, about last night," Marisol began, but he held up a hand. "Call me Shaq. And before you apologize, I need to tell you something." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I own the Pearl." The words hit Marisol like a physical blow. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair. "You? What?" "Have been since it opened 6 years ago." He poured coffee into 2 delicate cups that looked tiny in his massive hands. "Sugar?" Marisol shook her head, still stunned. "I don't understand. Why am I here? Why aren't you furious about what I said?" Shaq's laugh was warm, genuine. "Furious? Ms. Reyes, do you know what I saw last night? I saw someone who reminded me of my mama." He stood up and walked to one of the ID shelves, picking up a framed photo. In it, a younger Shaq stood next to a woman with kind eyes and a determined expression. "My mama worked multiple jobs when I was growing up," he said, passing her the photo. "She'd come home exhausted, feet aching, but never complained. Always put food on the table, always made sure I had what I needed." He sat back down. "Last night, I saw that same look in your eyes. That bone-deep tired that comes from carrying the world on your shoulders." Marisol stared at the photo, her vision blurring. "I still shouldn't have said those things." "Maybe not, but you said them because you were standing up for something. The dignity of hard work. That's not something to apologize for." He sipped his coffee. "Tell me, what did you do before the Pearl?" The question caught her off guard. I was a culinary student in Peru. But then..." She stopped, not wanting to burden him with her story. "Then life happened?" Shaq's eyes were knowing. "Yeah, life has a way of doing that. But sometimes life also gives us second chances." He reached for a folder on the table. "Which is why I have a proposition for you." Marisol's heart skipped. "Sir, the Pearl is starting a chef training program. Full scholarship, full salary while training. He opened the folder, revealing papers filled with details. It's something I've been wanting to do for a while. Give people a real chance to follow their dreams. But why me? Shaq smiled. Because you've got fire, Ms. Reyes, and talent. Chef Marcus told me about how you corrected his seasoning on the soup last week. Most importantly, you've got heart. That's something you can't teach. Marisol's hands trembled as she looked at the papers. The salary listed was more than she made at both her jobs combined. There's one condition, Shaq added. You have to tell me why you're working 2 jobs. The real reason. She looked up, meeting his gaze. In it, she saw not judgment or pity, but genuine concern. And suddenly, she was telling him everything about Diego's condition, the medical bills, the treatments they couldn't afford. When she finished, Shaq was quiet for a long moment. My mama used to say that God puts people in our path for a reason. He handed her a pen. Sign the papers, Ms. Reyes. Let's see where this path leads. Outside the Pearl, the Miami sun was high and bright. Marisol clutched the folder to her chest, still not quite believing what had happened. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Stephen Chen. Ms. Reyes, final chance for comment. Story runs tomorrow. She smiled, remembering Shaq's last words before she left. Trust me, Ms. Reyes. The best part of this story hasn't even been written yet. Looking at her phone, she realized he was right. Because what Stephen Chen didn't know, what no one knew, was that this story was about to take a turn that would change not just her life, but the lives of countless others. She just had to be brave enough to take the first step. Chapter 7. Hidden Truths. 2 weeks into her training at the Pearl, Marisol's hands flew over the cutting board with newfound confidence. The rhythmic chopping of herbs filled the morning kitchen with a fresh, green melody. Perfect brunoise. Chef Marcus nodded approvingly at her precisely diced vegetables. You're a natural, Marisol. She beamed at the praise, remembering her grandmother's words. Cooking is love made visible. For the first time in years, she felt that love flowing through her knife skills, her sauce making, her plating designs. The kitchen door swung open, and Shaq ducked his head to enter. He'd been coming in regularly, sometimes just to watch, other times to taste and offer encouragement. Today, he carried a newspaper. Morning, everyone, he called out, but his usual bright smile seemed forced. Chef Marcus shot Marisol a worried, Look, everything okay, boss? He asked. Just some press stuff, Shaq replied, tucking the paper under his arm. But Marisol caught a glimpse of the headline. Pearl loses its luster. A restaurant's fall from grace. Her stomach dropped. Stephen Chen's review. The day continued, but there was tension in the air. Regular customers canceled reservations. The lunch service was quieter than usual. And through it all, Marisol couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at her insides. That evening, after her shift ended, she finally found a copy of the review. Her hands shook as she read, but perhaps the most telling moment came when a waitress berated NBA legend Shaquille O'Neal and his guests, declaring that they never worked real jobs. This display of unprofessionalism reflects a deeper problem. At the Pearl, a disconnect between its supposed excellence and its actual service. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She'd caused this. Her outburst had hurt the restaurant, hurt Shaq after all his kindness. Her phone rang, Diego's ringtone. Wiping her eyes, she answered. Mama! His voice was excited. Guess what? My test results came back better. Dr. Patterson says the new medicine is working. Joy burst through her guilt like sunshine through storm clouds. The training program's salary had allowed her to start Diego's new treatment 2 weeks ago. "That's wonderful, mijo. We'll celebrate this weekend." "Can we go to the Pearl? I want to see where you work now." Marisol's throat tightened. "Maybe another time, baby. It's very busy right now." After hanging up, she sat in the empty kitchen, the review's words echoing in her head. She hadn't told Shaq about Diego yet. Somehow, it felt like taking advantage of his generosity to share her personal struggles. "Still here?" Shaq's voice made her jump. She quickly tried to hide the newspaper, but he'd already seen it. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "This is all my fault." Shaq pulled up a chair which creaked under his weight. "You know what my mama taught me about fault? It's like a recipe. There's usually more than one ingredient. But if I hadn't lost my temper that night, then I might not have seen what I needed to see." He looked around the kitchen thoughtfully. Sometimes things need to break before they can be rebuilt better. There was something in his voice, something that hinted at deeper meanings. But before Marisol could ask, Vernon burst through the door. "Sir, we've lost the charity gala booking for next month. They're concerned about the review." Shaq's face darkened. "That's the Children's Hospital fundraiser?" Vernon nodded grimly. Marisol's heart skipped. "Children's Hospital?" She thought of Diego, of other parents sitting by hospital beds, counting coins for medicine. "We'll figure something out," Shaq said, but worry lined his face. That night, as Marisol tucked Diego into bed, she noticed something new on his bedside table, a basketball magazine with Shaq's picture on the cover. "Mrs. Rodriguez got it for me," Diego explained. "Did you know he built hospitals for kids and started programs to help people go to school?" His eyes shone with admiration. "He's like a real superhero." Marisol stared at the magazine, pieces clicking into place. The Children's Hospital fundraiser, Shaq's regular visits to the kitchen, the training program. Was it all connected somehow? Her phone buzzed with a text from Chef Marcus. "Emergency staff meeting tomorrow morning. Important changes coming." She looked at Diego, peacefully drifting off to sleep, then back at the magazine. The article's title jumped out at her. Shaquille O'Neal, the heart behind the legend. Something was happening at the Pearl, something bigger than a bad review or a training program. And somehow, she was part of it. She just didn't know how much yet. The next morning, the Pearl's dining room felt like a funeral home. Staff members, huddled in small groups, whispering amongst themselves. Vernon paced near the kitchen doors, checking his phone every few seconds. "Did you see the online comments?" a server named Lisa asked Marisol. "They're sharing Chen's review everywhere." "A Pearl Fails" is trending locally. Before Marisol could respond, the main doors opened. Shaq entered, followed by 2 men in business suits carrying laptops. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming early," Shaq began, his voice lacking its usual warmth. "I won't sugarcoat this. The review has hit us hard. We've lost 30% of our reservations for next month." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. A busboy started to cry quietly. "The training program will be suspended," Vernon added, not meeting Marisol's eyes. "We need to cut costs." Marisol's heart stopped. Without the program's salary, she couldn't afford Diego's new treatment. The medicine that was finally working, finally giving her son his childhood back. "Sir," she stood up, her voice shaking. "Please, I know this is my fault, but—" "Sit down, Ms. Reyes," one of the suited men interrupted. "We're not finished." Shaq held up a hand. "Let her speak. The words poured out before she could stop them. The night I lost my temper, I had worked 16 hours straight. I was worried about my son, Diego. He has a heart condition, and the new treatment is so expensive. She took a deep breath. But these past weeks in the program, being back in a kitchen, learning from Chef Marcus, it's given me hope. Please don't take that away. The room was silent. Then Lisa stood up. I can take fewer shifts, she offered, to help keep the program going. Me too, another server joined in. I don't need all my hours, the busboy added, wiping his eyes. Shaq watched this unfold, something shifting in his expression. He turned to the suited men. See? This is what I was talking about. Marisol looked between them, confused. What do you mean? Just then, the kitchen doors burst open. Chef Marcus rushed out, waving his phone. It's gone viral. The Chen interview. It's everywhere. What interview? Vernon demanded. Chef Marcus thrust his phone forward. On the screen was a video from a local news station. Stephen Chen sat across from a reporter, looking uncomfortable. Yes, I wrote that review, Chen was saying. But there's something I left out. Something that happened after that night. The video cut to security camera footage from the Pearl's parking lot. It showed Chen walking to his car late at night, then clutching his chest and stumbling. I was having a heart attack, Chen's voice continued over the footage. And that waitress I criticized? She saw me from the bus stop. She could have kept walking. Instead, she called 911 and stayed with me until the ambulance came. Marisol's face burned as everyone turned to stare at her. She hadn't told anyone about that night, not even Shaq. She kept talking to me, Chen went on, about her son's heart condition, about how she recognized the symptoms because of his doctors. She saved my life, and I repaid her by writing a review that could cost her job. The video ended. Chef Marcus lowered his phone. It's been shared thousands of times. People are calling for a boycott of my column, not the Pearl. These changes everything, one of the suited men said to Shaq. The timing is perfect. Perfect for what? Vernon asked. Shaq smiled for the first time that morning. For the real reason I called this meeting. He turned to address the whole staff. The Pearl isn't just losing a charity gala. It's going to become a charity. Confused murmurs filled the room. I've been planning this for months, Shaq continued, to convert the Pearl into a non-profit restaurant. All profits will go to children's medical care. Every meal served here will help kids like Diego get the treatment they need. Marisol's legs went weak. She grabbed a chair for support. But we needed the right moment, the right story to launch it, one of the suited men explained. Ms. Reyes just gave us that story. The training program isn't being suspended, Shaq added. It's being expanded. We're going to train parents of sick kids, give them careers in the culinary world while helping their children. Tears rolled down Marisol's cheeks. Around her, staff members were hugging, crying, cheering. There's just one thing left, Shaq said, approaching Marisol. We need a head chef for our new training program, someone who understands both cooking and compassion. He held out his hand. What do you say? But before Marisol could answer, Vernon cleared his throat. Sir, there's someone here to see you. The main doors opened again. A small figure stepped into the room, supported by Mrs. Rodriguez. Diego? Marisol gasped. Her son wobbled forward on shaky legs, clutching a drawing. I made this for Mr. O'Neill, he said, to say thank you for helping my mama. As Shaq knelt down to accept the drawing, as staff members wiped tears from their eyes, as Vernon actually smiled for the first time in weeks, Marisol realized something. Sometimes the real test isn't about passing or failing. Sometimes it's about finding out why you were being tested in the first place. 1 year later, the line outside the Pearl stretched around the block. The sign above the door was new, reading, "The Pearl, every meal feeds hope," underneath the restaurant's name. But it wasn't the sign that drew people in. It was the stories. Stories of children getting life-saving treatments. Stories of parents finding new careers in the culinary world. Stories that began the night a tired waitress lost her temper with a basketball legend. In the kitchen, Marisol adjusted her chef's coat, the 3 pearl insignia on the collar catching the morning light. Around her, her students, all parents of children with medical needs, prepared for the day's service. "Remember," she told them, "every dish we serve today helps another family like ours." The kitchen doors swung open, and Shaq ducked in, as he did most mornings. But today was different. Today was the anniversary. "Ready for tonight?" he asked, sampling a sauce and nodding approvingly. "Almost," Marisol smiled. "Diego's been practicing his speech all week." As if summoned by his name, Diego burst through. The doors, his white junior chef coat matching his mother's. His cheeks were pink with health, his steps strong and sure, so different from a year ago. "Mom, Mr. Chen is here early. He wants to talk to you." Marisol followed her son out to the dining room. Stephen Chen sat at what used to be table 12, looking much healthier than the night she'd found him in the parking lot. "Ms. Reyes," he stood to greet her. "Or should I say, Chef Reyes?" "Marisol is fine," she laughed. "Here to write another review?" "No," he smiled, pulling out a thick envelope. "I'm here to show you this. My editor is running a special feature. How One Night Changed Miami's Heart." Inside were photos, dozens of them. Children who'd received treatment through the Pearls program. Parents graduating from the culinary training. Shaq serving meals alongside the staff. And in the center, a photo from that first night, captured by the security camera. Marisol, exhausted but defiant, standing up to a basketball legend. "Your story inspired people," Chen said softly, "including me. I'm alive because you stopped to help a stranger who'd just criticized you." "I just did what my grandmother taught me," Marisol replied. "That kindness is the secret ingredient in every recipe." The evening's anniversary celebration filled the Pearl to capacity. Regular customers mingled with families from the medical program. Diego proudly showed off his new chef skills, making perfect little ceviche bites just like his great-grandmother's recipe. When it was time for speeches, Shaq took the microphone first. "1 year ago, the Pearl was just another luxury restaurant," he began. "Then a tired mother taught me something my own mama always said, that true wealth isn't about how much money you have, but how many lives you change." He gestured to Marisol. She thought she'd failed that night. But sometimes what looks like our biggest mistake is really life's way of pushing us toward our true purpose. Marisol stood, holding Diego's hand, looking out at the crowd, at Vernon wiping away a tear, at her students standing proud in their chef coats, at Chen recording everything for his feature. She finally understood. "My grandmother used to say that pearls form because of irritation," she said. "A grain of sand becomes something beautiful through pressure and time." She squeezed Diego's hand. "This place, what it's become, is like that pearl. It took all of us, our struggles, our mistakes, our hopes, to create something precious." Diego tugged at her coat. "Tell them about the new wing, Mama," Shaq laughed. "That was supposed to be a surprise, little man." But the secret was out. Next month, the Pearl would open a second location, specifically designed to train more parents and help more children. As the applause filled the room, as Diego hugged her tight, as Shaq beamed with pride, Marisol thought about that exhausted waitress from a year ago. The one who thought she'd lost everything in a moment of anger. She wished she could tell her younger self what she knew now, that sometimes life's hardest moments are really just the beginning of something beautiful, that every pearl starts with a grain of sand, and that the most important ingredient in any recipe isn't found in the kitchen. It's found in the heart. Thank you for joining us for Pride and Prejudice at the Pearl, a story that reminds us how a single moment of courage can spark a chain of kindness that touches countless lives. Just like Marisol and Shaq discovered, sometimes the most beautiful transformations begin with a challenging moment. We'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Share your location in the comments below, and let us know if there's a special place like the Pearl in your community, somewhere that turns good food into good deeds. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who could use a reminder that second chances and kind hearts can change the world. Together, we can spread stories of hope and transformation, one tale at a time. Remember, every pearl starts with a grain of sand, and every act of kindness, no matter how small, can grow into something beautiful. See you in our next story.